I do a lot of videos aimed at helping people overcome anxiety, but in this one, I'm going to be talking about my weird anxiety symptom, how I used to try and fail to stop it, how I finally managed to deal with it, and what this means about anxiety in general. Along the way, I'm going to be talking about less common anxiety symptoms and what we can do about them. I'm Tim Box, and this is my weird anxiety symptom and how I finally dealt with it. So welcome back to my channel, or if this is your first time, I'm Tim Box, I'm a mind coach. And for the last 12 years or so, I've been working with people to help them overcome all sorts of emotional and psychological issues, and in particular, helping people to get control of anxiety. Over the years, my clients have described all sorts of different anxiety symptoms to me, and some are more common than others. We all know about the racing heart, the muscle tension, and the shortness of breath, but there are so many seldom spoken about symptoms of anxiety that are actually more common than you might think. So what sort of thing are we talking about? One of the things I'll often hear clients talk about is a feeling of numbness, cold or tingling in the hands or feet. This happens because when we're in fight or flight, it can cause the body to store more blood around the major organs, and as a result, less blood in the extremities such as hands or feet. Feelings of dissociation are also quite common when anxiety strikes, as our mind attempts to protect us from any unpleasant reality by numbing and detaching us from it. It's that point where the only option our mind has left is to take a psychological step back from proceedings to mute and diminish the potential emotional impact. Another thing that can happen is a change in our sensory perceptions, perhaps hyper-awareness to sounds, leaving us more jumpy than we might otherwise be, or blurry vision as our eyes take in more light, trying to spot every potential threat. Another common response is pulling at hair or picking and scratching at the skin. These often represent attempts to soothe or comfort ourselves in the face of distress. The list goes on, and believe me, it could go on and on, but most of the symptoms listed above are quite easily explained based on the fight or flight response. We feel the physical effects of our mind putting our body into a high alert, fast response mode. However, anxiety symptoms don't just stop there, and I'll often get asked by a client whether their particular response could potentially be a symptom of anxiety. No matter what that is, the answer is almost always yes, it can. Pretty much anything you can imagine can become a potential response to threat, even when it doesn't seem to have an easy or logical explanation as to why your mind would be doing this. And this leads me on conveniently to the point of this video. So, right from an early age, whenever I was going through an anxious time in my life, I always had the same physical response. I started blinking a lot. Often other people would notice it before I did, but I'd find myself blinking repeatedly and quite quickly over and over again, maybe 10 or 20 times in a row. And I had this weird thing where I needed to hit the correct blink so it felt like I could stop. And it had nothing to do with clearing or lubricating my eyeballs, because I'd also on occasion be doing it whilst laying in bed, eyes closed, trying to sleep. I remember one night in sheer frustration just shouting out loud, "I don't need to blink, my eyes are closed." This physical response would come and go as life's challenges came and went, but I remember my mum would always put it down to me being overtired. It'd often be worse at the end of the day, and for a long time I just assumed if it was starting to happen a lot, I simply needed more sleep. When I look back now, I recognise that it always happened during periods of my life that were causing higher than usual anxiety levels. I had quite bad phases when I was doing my exams or starting university. Relationship struggles always triggered it. And when I was in the period of my life when I was experiencing extreme social anxiety, it was really bad. However, I often went through phases that would last months or even years at a time where it seemed like it had just stopped. And I'd think that for whatever reason, I didn't do it anymore. But then it always came back, and usually whenever life was getting a little bit tougher. Sometimes it would become really noticeable to others. I remember at one point when I was experiencing relationship difficulties and going through a really pressured period career-wise, I was at a gig with one of my friends, and for one reason or another, we got split up and ended up standing in the crowd on opposite sides of the venue. At some point, my friend saw where I was standing and actually sent me a text asking if I was okay, because they could see from the other side of the room how much I was blinking, and they were worried that I was in some form of distress. I think on that occasion I just passed it off as smoke getting in my eyes. Over the years, I tried lots of different things to stop the blinking. I used to physically hold my eyelids down whilst I was in bed to allow the muscles to relax. I'd try deep breathing and progressive muscle relaxation techniques to release the tension in my face. I also tried imagining the tension washing away from my face, like water running down a drain, to see if I could encourage my mind to just let go of the response. And this was, of course, on top of all the obvious things like getting more sleep and more downtime. However, all the things that were helping me feel less stressed and physically tense weren't necessarily stopping the blinking. These days I look back and I'd say there were two reasons why these methods didn't do much. Firstly, I was trying to work on the effect rather than the cause, so I was physically trying to stop the blinking rather than addressing where the tension was coming from. And secondly, because I'd misunderstood the purpose of the response. I used to think the blinking was my mind telling me that I'm doing too much and need to rest and recover. Whenever I went through a bad patch, I'd diarise proper downtime and work shorter hours in an attempt to allow me to physically and emotionally have a breather. I was probably still working on the conclusion my mum and I had come to, that it stemmed from being tired and stressed. It was only later on when I learned more about how to listen to my subconscious and understand what my mind's trying to tell me that I realised it wasn't so much a stressed, overtired response and more of an anxiety response. It wasn't my mind telling me to stop, it was my mind telling me that I needed to do more because things were building up and I needed to take action. Yes, I would always be more tired than usual when the blinking got bad, but this wasn't the cause of the blinking. It was happening because it was the attempt to control everything around me that was causing me to feel overwhelmed and anxious. I kind of found this out by noticing that when I took time off, initially the blinking got worse. It wasn't rest that my mind was trying to instigate, it was action. When I stopped completely, my mind was just telling me I wasn't doing enough. It was only when I understood this that I was able to create more effective strategies to change my response. The problem here is that when we just react to the symptom, then we're not actually dealing with the issue. Once I recognised that my blinking was actually a sign that I was anxious about various aspects of life and the challenges I currently faced, I started to deal with it better. The first step towards getting control of it was to listen to and understand this message. Instead of just taking a break or a holiday, which never really worked, I started to manage my everyday anxiety levels better. I started to employ all the strategies I now regularly talk about on this channel. I stopped concerning myself with the things that were out of my control. I started to give myself permission to not get everything done and realised the consequences of doing that were not as bad as I'd imagined and actually nothing to fear. I started to take each task one at a time and stop trying to multitask my existence. I made sure that my mind was okay with getting regular rest and downtime, and that when I stopped doing for the day, there was no part of my mind freaking out about the inactivity. Perhaps most importantly, I did the work to restore my own faith in my ability to cope with life's challenges, no matter what they might be. As a result of that, I no longer felt the need to process and ponder every possible negative outcome. I was now cultivating the belief that whatever happened, I would in some way get through it. Understanding this drastically reduced the amount of processing my mind was attempting to handle and very quickly mitigated the physical response. The final thing worth saying here is that I still have times when I can feel myself getting blinky, but the difference now is that when this happens, I no longer become concerned about the symptom. I now know what my mind is telling me and I know how to answer that concern in my subconscious. I know that once any anxiety is addressed and dealt with, the blinking stops. The point is that I no longer simply try and get rid of the blinking. I recognise it as a valuable message from my mind that needs to be listened to and respected. So I made this video for two reasons. Firstly, I wanted to highlight the fact that the way we respond to upcoming threat or challenge is going to be different for everyone. We are all unique human beings, and as such we respond in our own idiosyncratic ways. I know what mine is now, and I know what it means to me, but everyone's will be different. And that's okay. It's okay because the second point I wanted to make is that there's nothing to fear from the symptom. It's just our mind trying to get our attention. Attempting to shut that response down or stifle the message being delivered is seldom effective. It doesn't address the cause and just suggests the symptom is something in itself to be concerned about. The better response is to engage with the reason behind it, to understand why your mind's trying to get your attention and deal with that truth. Maybe action needs to be taken, maybe it doesn't. But learning how we appease that part of our mind, which after all is only trying to keep us safe and happy, is often the answer to our anxiety difficulties. So when you feel that weird anxiety symptom, whatever it might be, starting to fire up, when you get that response that tells you, I'm anxious, don't simply try and stifle it and certainly don't fear it. Do your best to listen to it and understand what it's trying to tell you, because that's ultimately how you get control of anxiety and back in control of you. But now, it's over to you. You've heard all about my weird anxiety response, so what's yours and what do you do when it happens? Let me know in the comments below. I'm going to link at the end to a couple of videos you'll want to watch next. One is about derealization and depersonalization, two of the more distressing symptoms of anxiety, and the other is about the anxiety loop and how we break it. Guys, I hope this video has been of value. If you have any questions, then put them in the comments as well, and I'll do my best to answer all of them. Please hit that thumbs up button and share this video on your social media if you like what I do, and why not subscribe to the channel for weekly mind management tips and anxiety advice. But that's it for now. I'm Tim Box, Mind Coach. Always remember to be kind to your mind, and I'll see you next time.